have gone through the process, had some success, learned from it, and we'll be sharing that with you. So I'm going to start and introduce Deniz Satir, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Deniz Satir, and most recently I was with JDRF. I've been privileged and honored to work for that organization for more than 25 years, almost 27 as a matter of fact. And most of those years as the National Director for Signature Events, but also spent time in the field as Executive Director with Seattle, which is where I live. Very quickly to share just a tiny bit about JDRF's Gala program. There are more than 70 galas in JDRF across the United States. And in fiscal year 2019, so the previous fiscal year, we raised $77 million with that program. So, and of that, we have probably 29 that are $1 million plus galas across the country, engaging more than 44,000 supporters, sponsors, donors in our ballrooms in almost every state across the country. So I will leave it at that. I want to leave as much room as possible for discussion and questions, but happy to share more information, and it's there on the screen as you can see. So really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Deniz. Now I'm going to introduce Jody Phillips with the American Cancer Society.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Jody Phillips. I'm the Director of Distinguished Events for the American Cancer Society for the state of Illinois and North Central Indiana. So my scope is a little more narrowed than Deniz. I have 6 events in my portfolio and manage a staff of 5. And our portfolio is $5.3 million. We do galas, big golf outings, culinary events, and we have one of the largest young professional boards in the country. So happy to be here.
Thank you both. Well, we're delighted to have you too. I appreciate it. So we're going to start with some questions, and I encourage any of you that have questions as we go along to enter them into the chat, and we will try to answer them. So let's start with Deniz. So explain to us what you decided to do with your events when the shutdown hit, and why did you make that decision?
Well, sure. We all know that in March, somewhere between the 7th and the 13th of March, all of our worlds changed completely. It certainly wasn't a singular decision on my part. It was one that was made with combined leadership of JDRF at the regional and national level. While not an easy decision, an extraordinarily important one to make and the right one to make at that time. One of our first largest galas was going to be in Seattle on March 7th. And it was 3 days before when the decision was made on behalf of our constituents, our donors, and the organization. The right thing to do was to halt for the time being and get our bearings and see just exactly what was going to happen in the world. In March, when we made these decisions, we had approximately 30 galas that were yet to come in JDRF, whose fundraising was well on its way. And so immediately, being the fundraisers and the wonderful development people that JDRF staffers are, it was, how do we make the change? How do we make the pivot? Let's quickly find a new date. And everyone very quickly started to move into action. As we all know, we are action-oriented. However, what we did do, and it was the right thing, was to just hit pause for a moment in terms of allowing ourselves to think about what is the right thing to do at the right time. And so we literally took maybe a week to 10 days. While work did not stop, our activity around the galas was more about, let's envision a plan, let's build a plan, and then let's execute on that plan. And once there was decision and direction, there was momentum. And literally we unlocked the doors about March 31st, and everyone started on their way to continue on with their direct donor work, with a variety of strategies to support their virtual campaigns, leading to the night of a virtual experience, a virtual program.
Thank you. Jody, how about you? What did you all do?
Yeah, very similar. This was not a singular decision as well. It was local leadership, regional leadership. As a health organization, we knew in March that it would be irresponsible for us, considering the environment, to move forward on our largest gala, which was happening April 18th. So with leadership involved and our co-chairs, we decided that we didn't have to do a virtual gala on April 18th, that we had more time to really facilitate something remarkable. Virtual world, we have never been in it before. What does that look like? So we were able to as well pause at least on the date and push it into May 21st, but definitely wasn't a singular decision, and we didn't want to hold off, not knowing what the environment was going to look like. So,
all right, well, thank you. Deniz, what was your biggest challenge that you had to overcome in those early days?
You know, the biggest challenge, and also I always say the biggest challenge also offers you the greatest opportunity. And our galas and all of our events across all of our nonprofits really are driven by the partnership and the passion, the commitment of our volunteers. And we all know that not being able to meet in person was disappointing for everyone. And so it took a little bit, you know, for our volunteers to, you know, wrap their arms around what does this look like? What does this mean? How do we continue to do this? And so it really very quickly, they got behind the strategy of, you know, there are three real big pillars here, their principles, you know, and the purpose of creating a virtual evening, a virtual experience, a virtual program is really to thank, to inform, and to inspire, and to recreate as many of those elements that happen in the ballroom. While not totally able to do that, there's certainly pieces of that that we were able to do, and I know that so many others have been able to do over the course of the spring. So I would say that one of those challenges was really to help our volunteers come along with us on that journey in the very beginning, because they all had their hearts set, as we all did, you know, to come together. We're natural human beings, and we want to be together in one room and have that energy and excitement, enthusiasm to raise the dollars that we all want to raise so much for our organizations. So that would be the one thing that I would say, you know, kind of at the top of the list in the beginning.
Thank you. Jody, I'm sure you had some of those similar things, but did you have something else that that would come to mind you could share?
Very similar. You know what, making sure our sponsors came along with us on the journey, making sure they were engaged, and taking an in-person gala and those really exciting elements into the virtual environment. As you were saying, thank them, inspire them to give, really create something that they haven't seen before. And we were able to do that not with just the people that would have attended our gala, but we were able to market that to a wider audience, so we could reach more people.
Well, we're going to address the sponsors in a minute. So Deniz, how did you actually structure your events? And I know when we were chatting earlier in prep for this, that you had said what you did in the spring, you know, you've learned from, and you actually learned from every time you did an event. But describe what was probably the formula that you settled upon eventually.
Sure, absolutely. For the program in and of itself, the night of what everything led up to, you know, I think it's what I would like to start by saying, Joanne, is that as in everything that we do, one of the things that we quickly got around to, and that was talking about not just the event or the evening, what we were driving to. It wasn't about that being the destination. It was only now a part of the journey. And so we really spoke about everything as a gala campaign, because, you know, when this happened in the spring, our chapters in JDRF were absolutely in various stages of their fundraising, and many of them close to completion with regard to sponsorship and supporters and pre-commitments on funded need and so forth. And so then it became, how do we take this opportunity that night and really engage our supporters, both those that would have been in the room and our constituents who receive dollars from and benefit from our research and our services. So it's about a 360-degree engagement. How do we market that and what was the content. And so when we took a look at what does that program look like, it truly was an opportunity to welcome everyone with familiar faces. It might be, you know, chapter leadership, more than often than not, an evening host that would have been with them in the ballroom. And then it really was a small, in some cases, a portion of their live auction was an opportunity to keep bidding on the silent. And then we went into our emotional appeal, which we call Fund to Cure in JDRF, and everyone in real time had the opportunity to give to the organization at that moment in time. And in some cases, we were able to end some of our virtual experiences, our virtual programs, with some surprise performances. Of course, everyone was doing them virtually. I will add that with the 30 or so virtual programs that we did, they ran the range from being completely pre-recorded, but having the feel of being live, to being pre-recorded and having a live component.
Great. And Jody, how did you do it in a similar fashion, or did you have other ways that you you interacted with at the event itself?
We did it in a similar fashion. We did do some pre-recorded or live to tape where it looked like they were live, but you know, we taped them a few days beforehand. We had many sections that were live. We incorporated a social media contest into the event where we were able to put up on the screen during the event people posting like their favorite dress up your dog, or you know, your favorite cocktail. And so it was, we wanted to bring in that very interactive component so it felt more live. So there were many portions of the event where our NBC anchors who did the event would shout out people for their mission gifts, you know, would thank certain sponsors. Very similar. We call it raising hope. We definitely went into the event with a lot of pre-solicited mission gifts secured already, knowing that the virtual environment might be difficult for people to give. So a lot of the money was pre-solicited, and I definitely recommend doing that. But we had a lot of money that did come in that night. Maybe not the big dollars, but definitely a lot that added up.
And I know in both, I know when I talked to you, Jody, that you had said you don't actually sell tickets when pre-COVID. It's sponsors buying tables, right?
Right. Our Chicago Discovery Ball is sponsorship, so we sell tables, not individual tickets.
Okay. All right. And how did that change in the course of this?
Well,
you'd already bought their tables, so you already had that, right?
Yeah, we had a lot of money already in the door because our event was April 18th. So when COVID hit in March, we had a lot of those funds already solicited. We were really fortunate to be able to keep most of those funds. I think we had one sponsor back out and one sponsor decrease their giving. But other than that, our sponsors were very generous and stayed the course with us. And we utilized them to kind of promote the event to their internal employees, their internal customers, to try and just grab that wider net of viewers the night of the event.
Great, great. So Deniz, how did you handle the live and the silent auctions?
Yeah, great question. For our spring, for the spring events within JDRF, as I mentioned, everyone was in different stages of their procurement process. And so the silent auction for everyone really post this news and the fact that there are certain items that were no longer viable. Everyone inventoried what they had, determined what could go on for auction. And in most cases, everyone's silent auctions opened up and ran anywhere from 4 days before to 10 days before. So people had the opportunity. And our JDRF audiences and patrons are used to the mobile bidding process. And so for them, that really remained the same. They just had more time to do that. In the case of live auctions, where live auction was still viable, and in many cases it still was, what we found to be the right number, the sweet spot for people's attention span in this space was about 3 to 4, maybe 5 live auction items. And so we absolutely did those. But also, it's important to note that the live auctions were put out there for bid the same time the silent auctions were. So we were carrying those bids for the live auction into our virtual ballrooms once we got to that Saturday night or Friday night, whatever night it happened to be. And in some cases, some of the silent auctions would stay open until noon on Sunday as an opportunity for people to still engage if that's what they chose to do. I'm sure one question that'll be asked is how long were these programs? And the sweet spot really tended to be about 45 to 50, 55 minutes. I likened it to a sandwich. Not everybody eats all the bread, some of the bread, none of the bread. And in that particular case, it's not that we don't want them there for the whole thing, but we wanted them to have an appetite for what was in the meat of that sandwich or in the middle of that sandwich and be able to digest that. However, what's really important in the front and the end is sort of like when you go to a movie and you're seeing highlights at the beginning and you're seeing credits. So it's an opportunity to highlight past galas, donors, sponsors. So that is that recognition opportunity, that opportunity to thank. While you're doing it in the middle, you have an opportunity to bookend it as well.
Okay, great. We have some questions from the audience. One of them was, what software platforms or payment processors did you use for the gala?
For the auction or for the?
Well, the software platform would either be for the auction or for, presenting the gala itself, and then payment processors.
So for the auction, we use GiveSmart. I think everyone's heard of GiveSmart. And for live broadcasting the event, we did it on YouTube through our master brand channel. Because Facebook does have some limitations. So that's the platforms we used.
How about you, Dennis?
In terms of platform, the first one that we did was April 24th. Brave chapter, our Nashville market, stepped up and said, I'll do this for everyone, with everyone, and lead the way. And they did an extraordinary job. That one was done on Zoom and went very, very well. But the majority of them happened on YouTube. And I would have to say that became, I think, the preference. Some of them used and tried Crowdcast, which is another platform that allows for a different kind of flexibility, and simultaneously broadcasting on Facebook Live. The reason for, I think, a lot of folks to not go Facebook Live only is when we think about our ballroom and the demographics in the ballroom, we're leaving some people out who may not be Facebook savvy. So YouTube, everyone gets that. So that worked very, very well. In terms of the software to support the fundraising that night, we worked with One Cause as our mobile bidding for the silent and live auction. And that in this particular case was how we handled it. We also have our partnership with Greater Giving, and there was a piece of that they also partnered with us on as well.
And so in both of your cases, you had the ability for people to do auction with a mobile platform, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question that was asked is, what items did you see sell well in the auction? And would it be different than maybe what would have been if you had not had a virtual situation? Jody, how about you?
Definitely. In a in-person situation, trips are very popular, getaways, those items that you just can't get. In this environment, they were hard to secure, and just people are not going anywhere. So trips were definitely not something we were focusing on. We were focusing on physical items, things that people could use during this time of, quarantine. So definitely like electronics or, liquor packages and that sort of thing. So trips we knew were not going to be very popular.
How about you, Dennis?
In the live auction, Jody's absolutely correct. We all know that, no one was going anywhere at the beginning of the year, early in the year, and the concern would be when could we, if we, could we. And so trips and so on and so forth became not viable, at least those to Europe and so on and so forth. So those had to stay. What we saw in the live auction experience, we had, in some cases, we had wonderful wine verticals. We had experiences that did not have an expiration date on them, things that could extend into a 2021 sports season if needed. So there were a variety of different types of things. And surprisingly, the further we went into the spring, some wonderful dinner packages and gatherings of 10 or 12 people. Not that anyone was going to be doing that right away, but what we heard from people was, I wanted to buy that package because I'm so excited for when we can come together and be with friends in someone's home or in a fabulous restaurant. And so I think the other key to all of this is when we were doing it in the spring and when everyone was doing it in the spring was flexibility at the end of the day in terms of redemption for those items, and allowing for that flexibility allowed people to be as generous as they would be. But we all had to be realistic about what you could and couldn't put on, you know, in a live auction. And also we wanted to do justice to those donors who gave the items in the spirit in which they gave, to ensure that we were getting the best possible return and that we were really engaging and properly stewarding all of our donors across all sides of what we do.
Okay, great. Now I know that Jody says that they don't sell individual tickets, but how about you, Deniz? Do you all sell individual tickets to your gala?
Yeah, primarily, you know, the way that our ballrooms fill across the organization, across the country, is through sponsorship. Absolutely, there are individual tickets, but that is not the largest piece of our business in JDRF. We've certainly grown, the organization has grown to filling its ballrooms via sponsorship. And so that really was where we were living, in the space that we were living at, you know, come March. A lot of those sponsorships were already taken care of. And the majority of the chapters in JDRF chose to open this up to anyone and everyone. So if you were a sponsor who was going to have 10 seats or 20 seats, you now had the opportunity to invite more of your community. And so it really was truly something we all talk about. We're all limited by the four walls of our ballroom. So this allowed us to go beyond the ballroom. And while we might not have had as much time as we would have liked to build that strategy out, that's certainly more of a strategy for nonprofits as they look into the fall.
Sure. Jody, we have a question from another person that said, what did you employ creative ways to inspire virtual attendees during the event around your mission?
Say that again.
What are some of what creative ways did you employ to inspire virtual attendees during the event around your mission?
So we definitely had a very inspirational mission video that was, you know, halfway through the program, that just kind of encompassed where the American Cancer Society is at as an organization. Like all of us, we, you know, have been really impacted by COVID. And where our dollars were most needed. So we really highlighted in this virtual environment that the donor could pick where they wanted their mission dollars to go. In an in-person environment, that would be very hard to do with a room full of 800 people in a paddle race. We usually restrict those funds to one kind of mission. But in a virtual environment, we were able to let the donor pick. So they were able to pick unrestricted. So we could use the funds where the need was the greatest. We had a COVID-19 fund set up. And then we had cancer research. A lot of people are just very passionate about their dollars going to cancer research. So I think from that standpoint, it was very inspirational for people to be able to choose where they wanted their dollars to go. And we talked a lot about that during the program and during that very inspirational video.
Great. So Deniz, how did you handle the concerns of sponsors, and what were their concerns and how did you address them?
You know, I would have to say JDRF was in a very incredibly fortunate state at the time in our outreach that the chapters did to their sponsors, and that happened immediately. Wellness checks, I know that everyone was doing them, sponsors, major donors, checking in with everyone post, you know, the shutdown across the country, and talking about our galas. And all of the sponsors, honestly, within JDRF, every single one of them stayed with us. And those dollars converted directly to mission, since there was no benefit to being in the ballroom and so on and so forth. Very simply put, nobody asked for their money back.
That's great.
People came, they gave willingly. Their support and their commitment to JDRF stayed very, very strong.
That's great. So we have a question from Daniel, and I'm going to give this to both of you. I'm going to start with Deniz. How did the overall cost of your galas decrease? And then contrast that with not only your cost decrease, your revenue versus your cost.
Right. So in terms of, again, Daniel, and for everyone, in terms of where markets were in the process, everyone, and I would have to say our hotels across the country were extraordinarily wonderful partners to every single chapter. The expenses incurred were none or minimal in terms of when these events had to be put on hold and ultimately canceled for this calendar year and fiscal year for us. So being able to forego hotel and food expense was a huge piece so that our net would remain strong. Clearly there was production expenses, but those things would have been part of putting on a gala live. It just looked different. And in terms of the dollars raised, what we saw, again, we were raised primarily all of our sponsorship money. And we did probably, JDRF was able to successfully do somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of what we expected to do, which in extraordinary times was extraordinarily successful. And it was truly due to the work in the field by the chapter executive directors, the volunteers in terms of direct donor work and continuing to steward those sponsors and have conversations with our gala patrons who support our mission moment, which is Fund a Cure, and receiving those pre-commitments and in some cases matches and challenges that allowed us to continue to create a level of excitement even in the virtual space.
So your net way down, your actual, with your costs way down, was your net much higher than normal?
That's a great question. And honestly, I would say that our net was still, it was less than it would have been because clearly there's a lot of auction that did not happen. And as much as we would have liked, we had wonderful attendance across the country virtually. At the same time, it's not the same as being in a ballroom, having that energy, that sense of community and generosity when we're together and everyone enhancing one another's giving and generosity and helping everyone be more generous. So it's that idea of competitive generosity and competitive giving when we're together. That looks and feels different than when we're on our couches.
Right.
That being said, there's nothing that changed in terms of people's passion. It was just different, and the number of people, but engagement continued through the chat functions, and allowed us to ask people where they were viewing from, who was their T1D champion, why did they come, and it allowed them to thank sponsors, thank honorees. It allowed us to thank donors who were giving in real time. So there was some of that ballroom experience that could be replicated.
And Jody, how about you? I know we talked about this in our pre-call chat.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You do lose that in-person competitive aspect, especially in the paddle race. And we did not do a live virtual live auction. So, that was a decrease in revenue. We typically do in our Raising Hope, which is our paddle raise, about $500,000 to $600,000 at our Discovery Ball. So in this virtual event, we did a little over 280. So there is just a big difference with the energy that comes from a virtual to a in-person. That's why the pre-solicited, like really reaching out to your individual donors and your sponsors and your leaders to get those pre-solicited mission gifts is so critical. And we did that as a full organization. We had regional leadership making calls to high level donors, our executive directors, our major gift officers, myself and my team. So we really took an all-in approach on our virtual event since it was the first one not only in our region but in the country for the American Cancer Society. So we were really kind of setting the stage to what it was going to look like. Again, our expenses were much different than what an in-person gala will look like. Yes, we had production expenses that looked very different and much lower. We just don't have that food and beverage aspect to it. So our net was still less than what we would have done for an in-person gala.
Thank you very much. What did you learn that did not go well? Let's start with you, Jody. We would do again.
Yeah, we had a pre-show. We thought we would do some fun, entertaining things while people were getting logged in prior to the show. So Salesforce was our presenting sponsor, and they were kind enough to hire a comedian to do a couple segments in the pre-show. And you just lose something with a comedian when it's pre-recorded and not in front of a live audience. So probably wouldn't do a comedian again, and maybe keep, you know, the pre-show down a little bit. We kind of jokingly said we had a pre-show because we had a lot of videos that we showed, which was great. It gave people time to, you know, sit back, get their drinks before the show started. I definitely think we would make it more engaging, a little more live, you know, segments to it, and not so much speech related. I know for our standpoint, we wanted to make sure we highlighted our co-presenting sponsors and our mission sponsor. So yeah, just making it a little more personally engaging.
Okay, great. How about you, Deniz? Did you have anything that you wouldn't do again?
That's a great question. You know, we learned from each one, and I would say there wasn't anything that we would have said was a fail. You know, what would we do more of would be kind of the way I would look at it. And what I believe galas in the fall have the opportunity to do, and that is to utilize technology in a way where people can, whether virtually or in a hybrid situation, do more in terms of creating virtual tables, if you will, with private Zoom rooms where people can come together in a pre-reception sort of atmosphere before they go into the show. So, you know, that's what I would have wanted us in JDRF to have done more of. But as we've been saying, all of this, the learning curve was extraordinarily high. We all learned with each moment, with each day, with each week in terms of what we did and how we did it. And with each brave chapter in JDRF, we learned more. We took those experiences and we built on them for the next 27 to 29 markets that came. And really, truly, we knew that the best part of the formula was finding ways to ensure that we were keeping our donors and supporters close, because when we come out the other side of this, and we will, we want to ensure that our base is strong and that we have a position of strength from which to continue our work when we can come together again.
We have a really good audience question. It says, was there any place for volunteers in this setup? How did you make them feel engaged? Jody?
Well, I would ask, when you say volunteer, are you referring to your sponsors?
Probably people that actually, you know, work on putting the gala on or going out there and getting sponsors or that sort of thing. I would think that. Yeah,
we did recognize some of our volunteers in the pre-show. We had like a slideshow thanking our Illinois area board members. So we had their photos and their names and titles and the companies they were with, kind of, you know, a fun little slideshow recognizing them. We did do let me
interrupt you a second. How did you actually use your volunteers in this virtual environment versus what they would have done if you were putting on a physical event?
Yeah, so we did utilize our Illinois area board to do a giving match. They all came together individually and made personal donations. And then during the show, we did have the board chair announced that they would be matching every dollar for dollar up to $60,000. So we utilized them in like an inspirational standpoint.
How about actually going out and soliciting, you know, sponsorships and that sort of thing?
Our board always does lead generation for every large event that we have in our portfolio. So again, we didn't bring any new sponsors on after we've switched to the virtual environment. It didn't mean we didn't try and still solicit them, but it was very difficult to try and convince new sponsors to come on board to a virtual event they have never seen. I do think now that we know more, it would be easier to solicit sponsors. Just knowing, you know, the benefits that we have to offer. We were saying during that time, we were flying the plane as we were building it. It's exactly the same. You just don't know what you don't know. And right. So until you go through the process and the event and you learn so many new things, you just don't know what you don't know. So yeah, we have a large event coming up in the fall that's virtual, and that will look and feel very different from our spring one.
Okay, great. Deniz, did you all hire a production company to help you produce and coordinate the speakers and the program itself? I think you both did. So
yeah, the short answer to that question is yes. Every market utilized some type of production company, be it a production company that they would have been working with in their own market, if that company and the people there had the capability and the knowledge to do what we were asking them to do. In some cases, we had a couple of production companies work with multiple markets. Their work was everything from taking our content, creating the show, to then also calling the show as they would if they had been in the ballroom. JDRF staff were also part of the night of production team. We had separate back Zoom rooms for if we had live individuals, hosts, auctioneers, we could be talking in real time into their ear, sending them message, making them sure that they understood what was going on in front of the house as guests were being engaged. So it definitely took a village to make all of that happen from behind the scenes. So without a doubt, you absolutely need to utilize a production company and or team that you are familiar with or hopefully can get your hands on, because doing this, we learned very quickly, is not for the faint of heart. You know, and but when you get into it, it's you know, as odd as that may sound, it really is a lot of fun. You're putting on a live TV show or a taped TV show in every respect, and once you get moving on them, it can be quite fun and quite exciting just to see how it all turns out.
So we're getting questions fast and furiously. Did either of you use a call center to take donations over the phone?
We did set up a call-in number. Nobody used it. Most people were making donations via the GiveSmart
the mobile app.
Yes, and I did see a question come in there. We did. It's called a ticker at the bottom of the screen. You know, when you're watching a news program, you have the ticker at the bottom of the screen. Right. That is how we recognize sponsors and donors. We had their names scrolling along with their donation amounts throughout a good portion of the show.
Deniz, did you send your sponsors gifts, thank you baskets? And if so, how did you do it?
There were a variety of different chapters, got very innovative and creative, and that this is, again, you were asking about volunteers and how to get volunteers involved in this space. That was one of the ways that people could use their spheres of influence, and it was a way to truly support, you know, restaurants, caterers, and other, you know, individuals and vendors in a time where they couldn't operate normally. So yes, there were sponsor gifts, or there were gala in a box that went to people. It might be a little cocktail, the makings for a cocktail. It might be a bottle of wine or champagne, a couple of glasses. In some cases, it might be appetizer platters. It might have been dinner for people where they might have had 2 to 4 people. And later in the spring, there were some that felt comfortable where they might have had 8 to 10 people. And so, yes, again, short answer, there were opportunities and people got very creative, and it was a way to recognize sponsors who might have otherwise done something in the ballroom around reception and, you know, dinner and desserts and things like that. So there is that opportunity to engage those individuals in that way and those companies in that way. I also would just like to address the question around real-time recognition. I'm sure that, you know, we know that One Cause does this. I'm sure that others do as well. There's an opportunity for a scoreboard live during your Fund a Need. So in our case, Fund a Cure. And so we were recognizing their names would pop up as they came, not necessarily their amounts, but those names came. But at the higher levels where we had pre-commitments, we absolutely shared those names live with everyone watching, and we're able to thank them in the chat. But their names would scroll as the dollars would continue to rise throughout the Fund a Need, and we went through the different levels.
Yeah, I definitely recommend doing a thermometer of some sort during your live event. We did it for the totality of the event, like for the whole event amount. And that is very exciting during the event, especially your MCs, you know, can call out that thermometer several times during the course of the evening.
So Jody, please explain what components were in your pre-show and how long did that last? I know you talked about, you had the comedian.
Yes.
And then how did you measure engagement during this element or engagement of gala attendance in general?
Yeah, so our pre-show lasted a half hour. We did the comedian, we had videos running of different programs like our Hope Lodges, some of our leaderboard campaigns. We were watching the numbers on YouTube. So you can time it minute by minute, the number of viewers that are watching. And then we knew that a lot of times it wasn't just that one logged on, they were probably watching with other people. So that's what's great about YouTube and Facebook. You can see the number of viewers that were coming on and engage them in the chat.
And how about you, Deniz? And were you able, you know, how would you gauge participation versus what it would have been in a live situation?
You know, the way we gauged participation truly had to do with, you know, as much as we could moderate and create energy in the chat, that really was the place where that happened. You know, and when we saw the level of giving in real time during our Fund a Cure, our Fund a Need portion of the night, that's where we saw the engagement and the continued recognition and thanks of those individuals. I will say that one of the other ways where you saw an uptick in engagement was also another way that we used our local volunteers and leadership, and that was to create some even fun, engaging videos that allowed them to say hello as a group. They were pre-recorded. In one case, there was a father who was the board president with his son. They were both sitting there in their tuxes and they stood up and they were in boxer shorts. So, you know, again, it was important to have a level of familiarity for people, you know, so that it's like, oh, I would have seen them. I know that person. They're being thanked, they're being recognized, they're being toasted by a group of individuals that they see and they know. And so that was some of what you saw in the pre-show. We also in JDRF utilized our youth ambassadors to send messages to sponsors, to thank, to share some mission moments. And so those opportunities to continue to pull at people's heartstrings and inspire them to give and to give with hope, even in a time of great challenge and difficulty, allowed people to continue to give. And when they saw people they knew, you saw a level of engagement that changed and people writing something, oh my gosh, it's so great to see you, you know, in the chat function. And so that's where we saw individuals come forward, step forward, and show up and be there for JDRF as they always are. And this was, you know, no different.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm having trouble reading this. And if anybody hears a loud boom, there's a thunderstorm out my window, so don't be surprised. have you considered using these virtual events to segment donors versus ongoing live events? So I know that kind of goes along with one of the questions that I wanted to ask, which was, you know, what aspects of virtual might you use going forward when in fact we can meet in a live way? So Jody, how about you address that?
Yeah, we've definitely talked about, this has kind of opened our eyes to people being able to attend Discovery Ball that would not normally be able to attend it. So we have definitely started some conversations about what would a, you know, live stream portion of an in-person event look like. We haven't talked about it in depth. We definitely know we're going to open up the silent auction far and wide like we did this year. That was always just reserved for the people that attended the gala in person. So we did learn some really great lessons from the virtual environment and how maybe we can transition it and add it on to an in-person gala. Maybe it's live streaming just the program portion of the event.
How about you, Dennis?
It's a great question. I saw, you know, something similar pop up, you know, after it's safe for us to gather, you know, is virtual going to be with us? And I absolutely 100% believe with everything that I am that a virtual component and virtual strategies will continue to stay with us to complement once we go back in person, because it has, as Jody said, it has opened our eyes, but it is also opening up our borders, you know, beyond geography and our geographic footprint to allow people to join us in a variety of different ways. And so I believe virtual will continue to be and grow as part of our toolbox and our toolkits going forward. I will also say I don't believe anything will ever replace us coming together in our ballrooms, in our boardrooms, in our ballparks in the future. We just have to be able to do that when it's the right time for everyone. But yes, I believe that virtual will continue to be part of what people utilize, virtual being anything that you do when you're not together in person, you know, so whether it's email, digital campaign, videos that accompany that, reaching out to your broader constituent base across state and city and county lines, it is our opportunity to bring more people into our respective missions.
Great. One of the questions is approximately how much is the production cost? How about you, Jody?
We probably spent around $50,000 on production. I mean, and that is like some money we had already spent on pre-recorded videos. So when I say production, it's like doing our mission video, doing, you know, the live stream production company. So I think our all-in virtual expenses came out to be about $60,000. So.
How about you, Deniz?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are a few different ways to answer it, as Jody pointed out. You know, for some markets, there was already dollars invested in, you know, mission Fundacure videos. However, if the question is more, what did it cost to actually produce these online evening programs? The range, what we found across the country with the production companies we worked with, was anywhere from $6,000 to $12,000. It depended on the level of work and the robustness with which they were going to partner, whether it was completely pre-recorded, whether it was a combination of live and pre-recorded. We were fortunate in one of our markets, an extraordinarily talented staff person literally put the entire show together, and it was one of the most extraordinary virtual programs that we showed in JDRF. And they were videos done on people's phones or recorded in Zoom chats. And, you know, the staff person happened to be very, very savvy. But the production companies, they also, if they hadn't been doing this before, they also learned very, very quickly. And, you know, they probably lost money doing what they did with us, but they also learned a great deal that they're going to all take with them. You know, we're all going to take this with us as we move into the next season. Into the rest of this calendar year.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have to learn how to be movie producers, I think.
There's a little bit of that and a little bit of Hollywood in all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Jody, how long were your events and how did your viewer count compare to how many people attended in person?
So we typically have about 800 people in person. And it's a little hard to track viewer count. Again, you can only really track it with who's watching, who's logged into YouTube or Facebook. And so you have to kind of take into account that you're going to have multiple people watching on one device. So we kind of say we had over 2,000 people, viewing virtual Discovery Ball. So 800 in person, 2,000, virtually. I know there was more part of that question.
Yeah, the question's gone away now. So
I think length of program.
Oh yeah.
Our length of program ended up being about an hour and 20 minutes with the pre-show and the and then the regular show. I agree. You really need to make it a little more condensed, especially now. I think people are becoming, virtual event burnout. Because we're all virtual, we've got virtual meetings going on, we've got Zoom fatigue going on. So you want to kind of make sure that, the meat of the show, like Deniz said, is, really engaging.
Deniz, what did you do after the event? Did you have any post parties of any kind?
In a couple of cases, the markets created virtual dance parties. So people stayed, they had a band, that did covers and people could stay and enjoy. I think it's hard to keep, people have short attention spans. And in this virtual space, every second is a minute. And you need to make sure that those seconds and those minutes count. And, but for those that had them, people thoroughly enjoyed them, and to Jody's point, there is going to be a little virtual fatigue. So the innovation and the creativity that we saw in the spring is going to have to there's going to be a few little more bells and whistles and twists and turns as we go into the fall. And what does virtual look like? Can you do a hybrid situation? How do we take the ballroom to people's front porches and to their living rooms? Can you simulcast, across your market, in people's homes if they're comfortable doing that. So a lot of different ways and things to take a look at.
Okay, well, we only have a few minutes left. So, now we've got some more questions again. Can you repeat which sponsor benefits worked best? Jody.
Definitely recognizing your sponsors during the live portion. We sent out also a digital program book that we sent far and wide, so they had recognition in the digital program book. And you can make it look like an actual book where the pages, turn like a normal book. But definitely making sure our larger sponsors were verbally recognized during the live show, and then continually having their names kind of scroll across the bottom of the screen. We also do some highlights and cranes for our sponsors, but definitely during the live portion.
Do you have anything to add to that, Deniz? Did we lose Deniz? She's frozen. Oh dear. Okay. So how did you distribute Gala? I'm having trouble reading this. Gala in the box gifts to sponsors. Did you do that, Jody, at all? I know that Deniz was talking about that.
We did not do that for Discovery Ball. We are doing that for our large culinary event in November, which is a tasting event. So we are going to be doing experience kits that include meals from different restaurants, maybe, a mixology recipe. Again, we have time to kind of facilitate that process. We did not do delivery boxes for our gala though.
Okay, all right, great. Well, unfortunately, we seem to have lost Deniz. Technology is great when it works and not so great when it doesn't. So another question was, did you record your galas?
Absolutely.
And you made those available to people for later on.
Yeah, it still lives on, you know, our master brand channel, YouTube. We also took portions of the event and did like most galas do with their in-person events, a sizzle reel. So we were able to take, you know, portions of that live event and create like a thank you sizzle reel that we used.
Nice.
Yeah, that we used to send out to our sponsors and thank them again. Just another touch point.
Yeah, I like that idea, because sometimes people don't want to watch the whole thing again, but just highlight. So that's great. Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry that we lost Deniz. I want to thank her as well. I appreciate it. This was really fun. And I just want to say to the people that are attending, if you have further questions, you can always email me and I can reach out to Jody and Deniz and get their perspective. So we want to continue the conversation, and I wish everyone great success with what they're going to try to do in the fall. And again, thank you, Jody.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. And Tessie, do you need to put up a survey, I think?
No, the survey will come after the webinar is closed. So if we're good to go, we'll shut down and it should pop up in a separate window.
Okay, well, thank you again, everyone. It was great having with you today.